with a real treat. We have capital projects in the time of COVID, and we have TG Jayanth, who is a principal of his own organization and former McKinsey expert in capital projects. So TG, please do join us. Turn on your video. TG is a partner and friend, and very glad to have you with us, TG. He is a veteran of capital projects and construction with over 35 years of leadership experience in oil and gas, LNG, power, metals, and the mining industries, with owner, contractor, and supply organizations on large global projects. In addition to a strong record of leading successful projects, TG has also helped clients transform their capital project organizations and significantly improve the return on capital project investments. TG, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jose. I'll bring my screen on now. You should be able to see it. Yes. So as Jose mentioned, the topic that I wanted to discuss with you today is capital projects in the time of COVID. So very specifically to oil and gas, unlike other industries, I think we've been hit by, I mean, it's related, but we've been hit by both the constraints imposed by the pandemic, but we've also been hit by the drop in oil prices. And what that's caused almost immediately after the events of February and so on, as news started to come in, there's almost a total stop in capital projects being executed in the oil and gas industry. That was a normal reaction to the drop in oil prices, to the fact that we could not let construction crews work in the field, and so on and so forth. But since then, as we've gotten used to this, by around June, at least I've started noticing, as oil prices seem to have stabilized a little bit, and we've gotten used to the constraints imposed by the pandemic, and gotten used to working in the field under those conditions, there seems to have been a cautious restart in some project activity, at least in the more critical project activity. There's still a lot of uncertainty. I'm not denying that. There's still, conditions could be a lot better, but there seems to be some hopeful signs that projects would proceed, albeit with very strict constraints of social distancing and personal cleanliness and so on and so forth. The larger growth projects are mostly still on hold because the future is uncertain, but the kind of projects that are needed to keep your plants running seem to be restarting. So the big question that we should ask ourselves is, if we are a capital project organization, or if we're a company that does a lot of capital projects, what can we do in this kind of an environment? Well, that's what my presentation is all about. So the conditions like these basically tell us that we cannot be second class in project execution. We have to be absolutely top notch, because there is not much room for error. And capital projects does not have as an industry, does not have a great history of being on time or being within budget and so on. That has to change. By necessity, that has to change. So today, I'm going to talk to you about a few things that you can do that I've done successfully with my clients that could be very, very helpful in improving the performance of capital projects. The first one that I'm going to be talking about is putting that portfolio together, the list of projects that you're going to execute. This is one of the, it's one of the most undervalued parts of the entire project execution organization. Not enough attention is paid to putting together that list of projects you're going to execute. People simply compile that list. What you should remember is, it's not a compilation of projects, it's a competition of projects. Projects should compete to be on that list, which means only the best projects with the best return get executed. Make it onto that list. We'll talk in a minute in more detail about portfolio optimization. That's the first one. Second, once you've selected the projects you're going to execute, once you know which projects you're going to execute, how are you going to execute those projects? How well are you going to execute those projects? Under the current circumstances, it's even more important that we optimize the scope and the specs of these projects, because every penny that you can save on those projects you're executing can go towards another project that may not be otherwise executed. So doing it well is was always important, even more important under current circumstances. Third, risk management. Many organizations that I work with don't have a good risk management process in place. Risk and the way you handle risk is not just capital projects process. This is part of the company culture. It's the way the company thinks about what is yet to come and how you handle uncertainty. We'll talk about that in more detail, but when it comes to capital projects, it's a very critical process. There is no way around it. You have to do it, and you have to do it well today. Finally, I'll talk about execution. If execution was where it's at and if it was important previously, it's even more critical right now. So I'll talk about one technique that can make your execution best in class, that if you're not using today, you should really consider adopting immediately. So to summarize, the good news is that you can probably neutralize the effect of those cuts. Most companies have cut their capital spend by 30% or more, but I think you can probably overcome that, because my own personal experience working with a number of clients is that you can save 20 to 30% on your capital spend. What that tells you is that if you use the right techniques, you can do as many projects as you did previously for 30% less capital, which effectively takes care of the capital cuts that we talked about earlier. Just to before we get into those initiatives that I mentioned, I have to make a point. Capital projects rest on a three-legged stool. There are three aspects to capital projects. There's the people aspect, the process aspect, and the technology or the tools aspect. Every capital project pulls on these three resources, and we have to work on all three of them if you're going to improve the way you execute projects. So when I'm talking about the initiatives that I'm going to be speaking about, keep these three aspects in mind, because we have to pull on all three in order to improve our execution, capital projects execution. The first one, as I said earlier, is project portfolio optimization. The typical way many companies do them, as I mentioned before, there's input from the businesses. The various business units send in their list of projects they want to execute. These projects are put together in a preliminary project list, and in many cases, that list goes out to the field, and those are the projects that get executed. This box in the middle, the yellow-colored box, is where portfolios are optimized, and it's a very detailed process. And we won't spend a lot of time on it today, but what it involves is this. You take all those projects and you have to separate them by type of project. You have to classify them. Not all projects are exactly the same. There are certain projects that you're required to do whether you want to or not. These projects may not have a return on investment. There may not be an NPV that you could calculate, but these may be environmental projects, safety, health-related projects. So you have to do them either for the sake of the safety of people who are working on your plants, or for environmental reasons, because you're required to do them. So there are metrics that you use to optimize those projects as well, even though there's no financial return on those projects. So that's one type. The other type is the investment you make in your existing plants just to keep those plants operating. This could be cost reduction projects, it could be operational improvement projects, and projects just to keep your operation continuing. So this is sustaining capital projects. And then there are growth projects. This is where you start looking at NPV, IRR, and so on. And we have some metrics that we've used to compare projects which even have similar NPVs. So it's called profitability index, to compare projects and select the ones that you want to do. And then finally, there are the strategic projects, which you may also do, even though they may not be the best projects in terms of NPV. There shouldn't be too many of those, but there may occasionally be ones that you want to execute. These are ones you may do for competitive reasons and so on and so forth, or to get a market entry in certain markets and geographies. Those projects fall into that category. Obviously, this is almost like a ladder. Your mandatory projects you have to do, your sustaining projects you have to do. Growth projects are the next step. Given capital, then you go to growth projects and then strategic projects. Each one of these projects, as I mentioned before, have specific metrics we use to evaluate, and if they pass and if they are successful, that's how you rank them. The ones which rank higher get executed first. That's how you put your portfolio together. So I hope this gives you some idea of the work involved in compiling a portfolio and having projects compete for the place on that list. If you don't do this, you're probably leaving a lot of money on the table. Less valuable projects with a lower return get executed, whereas projects with a higher return may not get executed. And this is very common in companies with, mainly due to very naturally people who are sponsoring certain projects want their projects to be executed, and sometimes the return on the project get overlooked. So this process will ensure that that does not happen. The next initiative I want to talk about is this: how almost every company that I've spoken to, and I'm sure most companies in the audience today, if I ask you, you will say, oh, we have a stage gate process. All our projects go through a stage gate process before they're executed. Yes, I agree. But how good is your stage gate process? How effective is it? That is the key question to ask. And today you should be asking that question of your capital projects team. Let me ask you one simple question, and go back and check with the capital projects organization. How many projects that go through your stage gate process actually get rejected, get stopped, and get sent back, or are altogether denied investment? And if your answer is, oh, we hardly ever stop any projects, or maybe less than 10%, that indicates to me that there's a lot of room for improvement in your stage gate process. An effective stage gate process should be rejecting, stopping, sending back anywhere from 20% to 40% of the projects that are proposed. As your process gets more and more mature, and as your project teams become better at it, that percentage will come down. But you should still, the whole purpose of having a stage gate process is so that you can question those projects and, where necessary, stop them and improve them before they can go through. So that's the stage gate process. Let me suggest a technique, a new process that you can add to your stage gate process that will even improve the way, even if you have best-in-class stage gate process, can even improve it even further. And that involves a peer review process. And the peer review is conducted by a dedicated team. And it's a cross-functional team. Typically, you have a project manager, someone representing either engineering and or construction, depending on the capabilities of the project manager. A supporting member could be either from the engineering side or from the construction side. Somebody from the finance division is usually present. And then that's a core team. And then they pull in others such as procurement or legal or other functions as needed, contracting and so on and so forth. This team, all they do full-time for, let's say, 2 years is scrubbing projects, peer review of projects ahead of the stage gates. So the project teams are told that you have to have a peer review done before you present it to the stage gate, say stage gate 2 and 3. And typically, because there are so many projects and your large companies will have hundreds of projects, you want to draw a line and say all projects over pick a number, $50 million in size should go through a peer review, or $100 million, depending on the number of projects you have. So that could be a significant number of projects. So this team is dedicated to doing peer reviews full time. So for instance, they'll ask for information, get all the information this week on a specific project. The following week, they'll conduct a peer review, and at the same time, they'll be receiving information for the next one. So the week after that, they'll be doing their internal reviews, and the following week, they'll be conducting a peer review. So they're just going from project to project. Back in the days when we could travel, they may actually travel to the project location and conduct it in person with the project team, but you can do it almost as effectively under current circumstances remotely as well, as long as information is shared by the team. So we found that this process done ahead of the stage gates makes the job of the stage gate reviewer so much easier. So when you get to the stage gate, you're presenting the results of the peer review, you addressed all the comments that came out of the peer review, and the stage gate process becomes so much easier. Now, keep this in mind. The peer review is not an audit. It's not there to find fault with the project plan or the project people's approach to the project. It is there to suggest and help and provide a third-party outsider's view into the project. The people on the peer review team are experienced enough to say, hey, I did a project and this is what I came across, maybe you should try this. That's a kind of input that the project team is providing. It's a very scripted process. When we train the peer review team, we give them a list of questions that they should be asking. And as the team gets more and more experienced at this, they become better and better at it. And here are some added benefits. Typically, we make these assignments something that's really sought after within the company. So you pick your high-performing employees to put on the team. So there's a little bit of an internal cachet attached to being on the peer review team. Because for one thing, because you're doing this on the larger projects, there's exposure to the company leadership. Everybody knows who's on the peer review team. So we've done this at several companies, and there are some of our clients who have been doing this, who are on their third or fourth or maybe even fifth peer review team, each peer review team having done this as a rotational assignment for 2 years. So this has been going on for a while. And those graduates of the peer review team have gone on to fairly important positions within the company. So it's seen as an attractive career path as well. And it's a fantastic retention mechanism for high potential employees. Retaining a high potential employee is very, very important for many companies. And this provides you an additional path to doing that. The next initiative I want to talk about is risk management. I touched on risk management earlier and how this has to be part of the company culture. It's an absolute requirement for the situation that we are in, because there's so much uncertainty out there on how projects are going to proceed. This is always true. Things can always happen. I mean, I live in Houston, and we know that we could be hit by a hurricane every time there's a hurricane season, and that can really interrupt work if you're in the middle of construction. So, you always have to anticipate that and prepare for it. But now, regardless of where you live, there could be uncertainty and risks if you start a project at any point in the future. And those are not the only things. There are all sorts of other variables that we have to account for. Is labor going to be available when you need it? Is labor going to have the right productivity that you need to get it done? Are suppliers going to be on time delivering equipment? All these are questions that will come up during a risk workshop. We recommend a risk workshop at 2 points during the project development phase. The first happens during FEL2, which is a kind of a preliminary one, and then a really detailed risk workshop with the entire project team participating just before you go to your board for approval of the project, for full funding of the project. You should do a very detailed risk workshop. You should include, we really strongly recommend including your suppliers and your contractors. Please bear in mind that you may not have even selected your construction contractor at that point. So you may ask, how am I going to involve my contractor if I haven't picked him? What we did in my previous life, when I was on the owner side of things, we invited the contractors, one of the contractors who was on our bid list. We knew that we were going to be picking one. We went to them, and we went to one of them and said, look, this doesn't mean that you're getting the contract. All we want you to do is participate in this exercise and give us some thoughts on how you approach it. The benefit to you is you get a sneak peek at our project, and for the benefit for us is to get your input into this process. And they were very happy to do it, and we got some very valuable input from them. There are systemic risks and there are project-specific risks. This getting a little bit into the weeds. I won't say any more about it, but that you will be looking at all kinds of risks. But what is most important is that you will get the team to work through what happens if those risks actually manifest themselves, or how can you mitigate those risks? Can you do something ahead of time so those risks don't occur? That is by itself an extremely useful exercise. Many people tell me, hey, you're talking about risk, how about opportunities? Yes, absolutely. The risk workshop is a great place to identify opportunities as well, because the nature of the discussion is such that people will say, by the way, we're talking about this risk, but if we do this, we can completely avoid that situation. For instance, they may say, we have this problem with the productivity in the field. Why not take that off the field and modularize that piece of the process? So those kind of ideas come up, and then you start talking. You may take that as an action for a team to go look at and complete the exercise by such and such time, and then that may save you money as well. So opportunities get identified as part of this risk workshop. So it's a very, very useful exercise. And it's not just cost, it's also schedule. You're looking at both, and in many cases, schedule may be the main driver. So you may actually be willing to offset some of the schedule risk with additional cost. You may decide to fund that risk. So once you do this exercise, you will see what I'm showing on the right side, a kind of a probabilistic distribution of project cost. This is very, very important, because when you go to the board and tell them what the project is going to cost, you should be able to speak in probabilistic language. It's very, how shall I say, it's kind of risky, if I may use that word, for you to say, board of directors, this project will cost $400 million. I can tell you with almost 100% certainty, it's probably not going to cost $400 million. It could be higher than 400 million, it could be lower than 400 million, almost not going to hit the number exactly, right? So instead of giving them a deterministic single number, how would it be if you could go and tell them, look, we have looked at all our risks, we evaluated them, we mitigated what we could, we put in contingency to cover the rest. There's a 75% probability of us coming in at $425 million, let's say, instead of 400. So let's fund the project at $425 million. Then you have this. So this is where the company culture comes in. So the board of directors may say, management may say, we are relatively risk averse. We are comfortable with a 75% probability of it coming in. We know what to say to the street if we exceed that number, but 75 we're comfortable with. So let's fund it at P75. On the other hand, they may decide, this project, we are very risk averse, we don't want to take a chance, let's fund it at P90. Okay, so let's do a $450 million budget for this project. This discussion has to happen, and it very often does not. You go in with one number, the one number gets blessed, and then a year later, you're 10% over, and your CEO has to go in front of analysts and explain why you blew your budget. It avoids all that embarrassment if you can do a proper risk management up front and be very transparent to your management and your board on how to manage the risks on the project. The final one that I wanted to initiate that I want to touch on is project execution. Everything we've been talking about until this point happens in that front-end project development phase, which is extremely important. Much of the success of the project depends on how well you do the front-end project development. But once the project is funded and you're out in the field executing it, that's really super critical that you do it well. I mean, when I say you, there are multiple players involved. Now you have a construction contractor. You have engineering documents coming in that are feeding the construction contractor. You have suppliers who have to supply equipment at the right time to support your construction. There's so many other things that are going on. It's extremely critical. Now, this is an oil and gas audience that I'm talking to, so advanced work packaging or AWP may be familiar to many of you. This is a technique that mostly the process industry has started adopting almost as a requirement. So if you talk to people at ExxonMobil and Shell and Dow and so on and so forth, they'll tell you that they are requiring their contractors, they're mandating their contractors to use advanced work packaging, AWP, on their projects. So if you are listening to this and you're not sure if your company is using it, please go and check with your capital projects organization. Ask them if AWP is a requirement on your projects. And if they say, no, we don't really ask for it, ask them why not. The bigger companies are saying we have to, and contractors, I mean, every contractor, Jacobs, Fluor, Zachary, they are all learning how to do it. They're mastered. Many of them have been doing this for years. So they are providing this service. They're providing this. They can do it. Why wouldn't you use it? It saves 10% of project costs, despite the fact that you have to make some investments in resources that you may not have had. Because advanced work packaging and work phase planning, which go together, requires you to invest in some additional resources. Either you or the contractor. It doesn't really matter because the contractor is going to pass the cost on to you as an owner. So there is an additional cost involved. However, net of that cost, you can save 10% on the total project cost. I actually think that's a bit of a challenge to us. I think we can save more than that, but that's what the industry research organizations such as CII have been able to quantify, because these are 10% proven savings. And who can walk away from 10% savings in today's environment? Yeah, this is something that you absolutely have to consider. So what is it? What's advanced work packaging? If I have to really condense it, it's really construction leading engineering rather than the other way around. If you think of the traditional way of doing things, engineering will say, okay, process plant is the most important part of this process. It takes the longest time to design. I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to do the design. I'm going to send those drawings to construction. In this situation, in AWP, we kind of flip that on its head. We bring in construction fairly early in the process, and we ask construction to look at the plant layout, and tell us, engineering and procurement, in what sequence construction would prefer to do their construction. Where would they start first? Why would they do it? It's not construction dictating the path. It's construction expressing their preference, engineering and procurement collaborating with them, and everybody agreeing on what the path of construction should be. And this is done early, during the project planning stages. And the little image you see on the right is a typical path of construction, where construction has said, okay, this is where I'm going to start work, and then I'm going to do this next, and so on and so forth. This is a starting point. And then engineering and procurement and all those other people work together to create engineering work packages and construction work packages. And ultimately, when the construction crew shows up in the field, every crew will have exactly what they need, which is known as an installation work package, which represents 2 weeks of work for them to do. So they pick up the package. It's the next job. They have all the drawings they need. If they need a scaffolding, the scaffolding has already been taken care of. Scaffolding is in place. If they need a crane, the crane has been arranged. All the material and equipment that they need has been packaged together, identified, and available. Why are we doing this? Because studies have shown that construction crews spend 63% of the time in non-value added activities, which means they're only spending about 37% of the time actually doing work, installing equipment. The rest of the time, they're walking back and forth to the warehouse, picking up material, or they're looking, they're trying to find the right drawings, or they're asking questions. They're wasting non-value added activities. Now imagine if somebody had taken all that away, given them the correct drawings that they need, given them the procedures, given them the processes, arranged everything ahead of time, how much more effective they would be. That is advanced work packaging and workplace planning together. So that's why I say, I mean, it sounds simple. We haven't done it for years and years. Now it's finally been put into a process where it's been a significant amount of time has been spent on streamlining it and preparing it. So we are ready to go. So if you're not using it, you should be using it. So please check on this. Very important part of your construction process. I'm just going to summarize before we turn to Q&A. The constraints on capital means that we have to be at the top of our game. We don't have a choice. We have to be the best at this. If not, it's going to be really tough. So it was always tough. Capital projects was always tough. It became even harder, which means that we have to up our game. We can do it. I mean, as I said before, we can do it. The levels are there. It's for us to go out and do it. We have the knowledge, we have the capability, and we absolutely should do it. So great incentives to get our organizations to that level. And I'm really looking forward to your questions on the discussion after this.
Excellent, TG. Thank you so much for that view of the capital projects and some of the major drivers for capital projects, and maybe a bit of a rebirth of capital projects after we get through this phase. The question for you, one of the first questions that came up here was just a bit of your own perspective on the industry and capital projects across different industries. Are you seeing any bright spots out there? Any industry that, I mean, everybody has been affected, but anybody who is either affected maybe relatively less, or maybe there are opportunities that came up, or geographical locations that are still moving ahead despite all the challenges. Any feelers that you have out there in the marketplace?
Yes. There's one part of the economy, one industry that really seems to be going great guns, even under these current circumstances. Those are the data center construction and the warehouse and distribution center business. Just booming. I mean, they are going to be building more of those in 2020 than in 2019. So if you're looking for green shoots, that's where it is. Everybody needs broadband right now, so we need the data centers. So they're building data centers like crazy. In fact, some of the retail centers that have been shut down are being converted to data centers now. So that's happening. Same thing, because of e-commerce. E-commerce is driving a lot of warehouse construction and distribution center construction. So Amazon obviously, but also a number of others are investing in that area. So yeah. So if you're looking for a job in construction, that's where it's at.
That's very interesting. That's really very interesting. Another question here is a bit of a commentary and question at the same time. Someone who clearly works on a project organization, and they're talking about and you discussed this, the need for risk management, and the commentary is that in his or her organization, it may have gone a little too far, because now they have IRBs, CRBs, PRBs, ERBs. By the time you get through all of that, you don't have a project anymore, no matter how you started. And or what you have is like the project team doesn't even recognize their own project. So and you touch on this, and you touch about the need to prevent the optimism bias that the teams have, but also create boards that are not just there to criticize, but to help. So some of them, and you talk about the peer review, and that's an important component of it, but tell us a little bit more about how do you start shifting culture? Because you can put a bunch of people on the peer review as well that just are naysayers, or they'll tell you everything that could go wrong and don't provide much in terms of suggestions. How do you get around some of that? That happens really quite often in all organizations.
It does. Yeah, it does, and you're absolutely right. It's a cultural issue. This is not a question of process. And now all these multiple things. What happens is over time, processes accumulate, and people go through these processes because they're there, and nobody questioned whether those processes serve any useful purpose or not. So you just keep doing them over and over and over. This is a great time, Jose, to actually stop and think, do we really need that process? Does that process need to be as complex as it currently is? Can we simplify it? I mean, I mentioned how important it is to streamline projects from a cost perspective. It's just as important to streamline from a time perspective. If you can save a month or two during the development phase by avoiding a process that's no longer adding value, that's money in the bank for you, right? Because you could be doing some other project that takes a lot of resources. So it's a great time, and I'll tell you about my experience as a consultant. When I was at McKinsey, we would go into, we'd go and talk to companies, and this is also true when I'm as an independent consultant. When we talk to companies, a lot of the capital projects organization people will tell us, look, you're saying we should have a realistic idea of risks. Our management has told us that we should never exceed our budget. We get killed if we exceed our budget. That is a company culture that's become so. I asked them, so what is the performance of your project? They say, we never exceed our budget. Our projects are all great. We never exceed our budget. You know what I tell them? I tell them, I can save you at least 25% on a capital budget. What that tells me is that they're stashing money into their budget so that they never exceed. In a healthy capital projects organization environment, some projects will go above budget. Some will be under, some will be very close to what they budgeted at. So long as you can understand why those projects went over, what is your risk tolerance, you're in great shape. But if you give the message to your team that they will be punished if they exceed the budget, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. They're going to be stashing money everywhere. Something that costs $100 million, they'll present to you as $150 million because they want to finish under budget at the end of it. So yeah, it's a cultural difference that I'm telling you, it's a lot harder to change that than to change a process. But you start with the leadership, and they explain some of the drawbacks of that attitude, and that's how you work towards changing it.
Very good, very good. This brings me back some memories. I was working at one point in an organization where we did an analysis just like that on project performance, and there was a normal distribution that was incredibly unusual normal distribution. Well, it was a normal because you had at zero budget, you had almost everybody at zero, and then you have a little bit on the right side and very few on the left side, which is over budget. Yeah. And we knew that was not possible.
That's not normal.
Yeah. Behave that way. And as we got deeper, we found exactly what you said. They would allocate money so to cover up for the shortfalls and not look bad. And so it's pervasive in a lot of capital project organizations. These projects are long time sometimes, and allocations of budget are complex. So that's a great insight. So TG, another question that has come up here has to do about a topic that you really didn't cover explicitly. And the question is about about technologies in capital projects, and especially new technologies in capital projects. Can you talk a little bit about if there are technologies that are helpful for capital projects, or is it just mostly hype and not necessarily performance?
No,
What are your thoughts on that?
It's not hype. It's very real. It's a great time to be in capital projects, and that's one of the reasons for it. It's almost as if Silicon Valley has discovered construction and capital projects. And lately there have been a number of reports. There has been, in fact, a very often quoted report from McKinsey from a few years ago about construction productivity, which actually opened up a lot of discussions across several industries on how low productivity is in the construction side, and at the same time, how low adoption of digital tools is in construction. So the people in Silicon Valley, technology in general, looked at that and said, my God, what an opportunity. And the beauty of it is, it's not just the big companies. The big companies, Oracle and so on, already have tools for construction. But there has been an explosion of small startups jumping in and creating tools to help construction improve. And yeah, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned it somewhere in my presentation. This is a great time, and every one of those initiatives that I mentioned, whether it's portfolio management, whether it's the peer stage gate process, or whether it's risk management, whether it's advanced work packaging, they all have new software and hardware tools to help them get implemented. And it's really a fun time, because for someone like me who enjoys technology but also wants to see a real improvement happen in my field, to talk to these companies and the ideas that they've come up with on how to improve. Obviously, we don't have time here today, but if someone wants to get in touch, I can talk at length about some of the technology tools that are available for doing a number of things that will improve your capital project performance.
So now you tempted all of us. So if you could, I know it takes time to talk about all of the possibilities, but if you could just pick one example of a technology that's making a difference right now, what would you talk about?
So here's one simple example. So if you go back 5 years, and let's say that you're executing a project, okay, what are the software tools you'll have? There's something called Primavera P6. It's a scheduling tool. It's been there for a very long time. So your project schedule is probably on a Primavera P6 or on Microsoft Project. So these tools have been around, for quite a while. But other than those, other than the scheduling tools, you find people using Microsoft Excel for doing your cost tracking, for doing change management, for doing almost everything on the project. And the result of which was you're a project manager, work is happening in the field today, you want a report on where you are compared to where you should be. You usually have to wait until the end of the month before you find out if you're ahead of schedule or behind or right on schedule, what issues are happening. That's way too late. You can never hope to catch up. The tools that are available today, put together with the processes that we have put in place, enable not just the project manager, but almost everyone within the organization to get almost an instantaneous snapshot of where the project is. What this does is you can react instantly. So if you're starting to fall behind, you can bring in additional labor, you can move people around. If there is a change order request from the contractor that's waiting in queue to be approved, and that could impact your schedule, a flag goes up and tells you, hey, better attend to that. If not, that work is not going to be done. So it may seem simple, but just bringing the visibility to the project manager has made a night and day difference. One other tool, people would have to go after contractors and write down how much work was done today. Now there are tools available where you can do a laser scan. There are even robots that run around and scan the work that was done and that give you a report on how much was put in place. So, Drones are being used for surveying work. Automated equipment. Let's say that you're preparing the construction site. You bring in your dozers and your excavators and so on and so forth. The trend is towards automating all that equipment, so it does not have to stop. It does not have to be manually operated. Virtual reality, augmented reality tools are becoming more and more common. You can put on your virtual reality headset and visualize the plant before it's even built. You know exactly what it's going to look like, because all you have to do is load up the 3D model into the software, and it'll show you how it'll look. So just imagine an operator being able to walk through the plant and say, "This is where I'd like my valve to be so I can access it. Please move it to the other side." You can do all this long before the plant is even built. So the changes you make are on the drawing, not on physically. I could go on all day, Jose. Sorry.
That's fantastic. We will need you to come back to talk just about the topic, because
Yes.
there's so much depth to that, and
Yes.
really appreciate it. Well, we are out of time right now, so unfortunately, I have to say thank you so much, TG, for coming in and sharing, a deep perspective on what's going on in the industry and what can be done differently here. We're very grateful for your leadership and for you sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you very much, Jose. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this completes day one of Oil and Gas Live. Now, great presentations today, wonderful experts sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. Tomorrow, we have an awesome day planned for you. So very early in the very first session, we have the global improvement leader from the Dow company, Julie Thine, sharing with us the use of short interval control to drive performance at Dow. So you do not want to miss Julie's session. It's a fantastic session on how Dow is actually truly improving their performance by using these techniques. After Julie, I will actually run a award-winning session called Energy Disruption and how great people and organizations innovate in times of rapid change. We're going to look at the industry, and we're going to look at how, not only in the oil and gas industry, but across multiple industries, how great enduring organizations emerge. Are they the ones who are most operationally excellent? Are they the ones who are most innovative? And how do they deal with crises like the ones that we are undergoing right now? And there will be some really interesting information there, some benchmarking information about those industries, and certainly the principles for the great enduring leaders and organizations. And I hope that you enjoyed that. And that will be followed up by the Vice President of Operational Excellence at Duke Energy, speaking directly from North Carolina to us. His name is Ed Brewer, and Ed is going to be talking about assessment as an accelerant to operational excellence. And he's going to talk about how assessments at Duke Energy have really, really stepped up and scaled up their operational excellence results. So great session with Ed, and we're going to wrap up the day with Jonathan Carpenter, who is the group head of strategy and transformation for Petrofac, and he's going to be coming to us directly from the United Kingdom. And John is going to talk about the digital plant and how they are using technology to reduce downtime and operating costs, and very much connected to the last comment that TG Jayanth just made about virtual plants and the digital world that's being created. So very much on the topic of digital transformation and how digital transformation is being implemented at Petrofac globally. So it's exciting sessions ahead. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope everybody has a great day. The conversations continue on LinkedIn, so please go there, ask your question, put a comment about the sessions, and several of our speakers will go back and answer your questions, including myself. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.